Hey everybody, today I'm going to be starting a new series called Games I Got Rid Of and Why. Now I think it's pretty self-explanatory what this series is going to be about, but I thought it would be interesting because there are a load of reasons why I choose to get rid of games from my collection, and almost always it's not because they're bad games. I personally like to run a real tight ship and be quite cutthroat with the games I keep in my collection, because for me, if I'm not excited to play a game again, even if it's really good, it will be gone. And that's because there are so many games out there. It's a real saturated market, and I really do want to have the best of the best in my collection. So I've got a lot of games to go through, but I'm going to be breaking these into 10 games per video, and so there's probably going to be quite a few videos. And I'll try to get them out maybe every couple of weeks or so. So let's get started with this episode. So my first game I'm going to talk about is 10 Minute Heist. Now this is a pretty simple set collection game that takes probably about 10 minutes to play. And you are going to be having your little worker and these rows and columns of cards. And the idea is you're trying to collect these different items, but you can never go back on yourself and up the tower. And you've got to try to get to the exit, and you get a few bonus points if you get out the exit. And you're trying to collect different types of cards, and whoever's got the majority of each type is going to score a number of points. From that explanation, you'll probably understand why this didn't stay in the collection. It's very generic, and it does what it does quite well. But for me, it didn't have that extra layer of interest to make it different from a lot of the other games out there. Ultimately, there are a lot better filler games out there for me. While there's nothing wrong with this one, it just didn't excite me at all, and it never got played because of that. The next game I'm going to talk about is 10 to Kill, or 10 Minutes to Kill. This one, I suppose it's not a very popular game and not a very well-known game. But it's a game that takes place on this city, and you've got this kind of bird's eye view of the city made up of all these different tiles. And on all those tiles, you're going to put these different standees of these really wacky and wild kind of anthropomorphic animals. And the idea is that we are these assassins, and everybody's going to be given a character which nobody else knows at the start of the game. And you also get given 2 targets that you're going to try and kill throughout the game. And on your turn, it's going to consist of, I think it's 2 movements, and you're either going to try to move a character, you can move a police officer, or you can choose to assassinate someone. And you've got different options on which you can assassinate someone. Like, for example, you can shoot someone who's on an adjacent tile with you, or you can use these sniper tiles which you can shoot way across the board, or you can stab someone who's on the same tile as you. And the idea is you're trying to muddy the waters, trying to not let people know who you are because they'll try and assassinate you. But all that sounds awesome. It looks really great artwork and stuff like that. But for me, it wasn't a lot of fun because, number one, it relied heavily on memory, because you needed to know who all the different characters could have killed that person who was just assassinated, because you need to remember it for the next time that someone's killed. So who's going to be the common denominator in those, so you can actually work out who's done it in the first place. So it had a really strong element of memory, which generally I don't like. And second of all, I found what you do on each turn really restrictive, because you can only ever do two things, and because of the way that you want to muddy the water so much, everybody ends up kind of compiling in a certain area of the game, meaning that because the police officers are there and they stop you from assassinating people, you are constantly just moving things around, and whenever it comes back around to your turn, it's almost like, yes, I'm nearly ready to kill somebody, and then the person before you moves them back to where they were, and it's so frustrating, and you just end up going through the motions, just moving them back into their places, back and forth, and never actually getting anything done. So I found this way too restrictive, and just each turn being too restrictive and not being able to do enough, and for that I didn't enjoy it at all. So that's the reason why I got rid of 10 to Kill. Next up, I have 13 Clues. Now 13 Clues is a pretty nice deduction game. It's pretty standard fare, where you are trying to work out the cards in front of you. So you have cards like a weapon, a person, and I think a location. I haven't played this in a long time, so forgive me if I'm a little bit wrong. And you are trying to ask questions of your opponents about what they can see, basically, because everybody can see everybody's pieces apart from your own, which is cool in itself. So I really like that idea. And it's your standard deduction game. You're trying to work out, how many items they can see and tick things off and things. But the reason why this one left the collection was because it simply got replaced. Awkward Guests came out and completely just smash this one into the mud. There was no reason to go back to this one when such a great deduction game came out there. So no ill reflection on 13 Clues. It did what it did really well. Enjoyed it. I'd even play it again. But ultimately, there's way better games out there now. Next up, I've got 5 Second Rule. This one was actually a game that my dad won in a raffle. Awful party game where you are given a category and you've got to think of 5 things in that category in 5 seconds. Absolutely terrible. That's it. I won't even talk about it. It's just so bad, and that's why it's gone. Next up, I have 5211. 5211 came out a couple of years ago, and when I reviewed it, I did review it quite positively, and I still do think of it in quite a positive light. It's a game where it's self-explanatory by the box, 5211. You always have a hand of 5 cards. You play 2 cards, you play 1 card, and then you play another card. And the idea is that you are trying to play the most colours of cards to be the most numerous, because if you have the most numerous, or whatever the most numerous colour is amongst all the players, they're going to score you points at the end of the round. But the trick of this game is that when you played a certain amount of colours and it got to a certain threshold, then that colour would go bust and then the next one down would score. And if they would have a tie in colours, then the next one down would score again. So it's a game about being quite clever about what you play and try to shaft other players by making their colours go bust. And basically try to tinker the game to your benefit. But the reason I got rid of this one was no real bad reflection on the game. It was just because I felt like I'd played it out, I'd explored it. There wasn't really any reason to go back to it. There was this kind of trumping rule in this game where if you had a certain number of these Kododo lizards out, then that would be all the lizard cards would score. But I found that never really happened, and I don't really like it when kind of exceptions to the rules and kind of novelty things don't happen in games. It just didn't seem to work quite as well as I would have liked. And I found that a lot of the times the game would always play itself. It would always be quite obvious about what to play. And on top of that as well, the idea of going bust, it never really seemed to happen as often as I would have liked as well. So I thought sometimes the thresholds were a little bit too high, where it would have been a bit of a tighter game and a bit more of an interesting game if the colours would have gone bust at a lower value. And that's why I got rid of 5211, ultimately because there's better filler games out there. Next up, I have Abyss. Now, Abyss is an interesting one, and a game that I went through a bit of a journey with, because when I first played it, I thought it was so-so, and then I learned to really love it. It's a really interesting pushy luck game where you are drawing these cards, all the different symbols, then you're using those symbols to buy these character cards, and then using those character cards for their cool abilities, and ultimately to buy these different location cards to give you set collection bonuses. A real unique game, and I can't really think of too much like it. Beautiful to look at, great aesthetic, flows really nicely. But for me, there's probably 2 reasons why I went through the process of getting rid of this one. Number one is because I always found that the winning strategy was to rush the end of the game, just to buy what you can when you can, rather than trying to strategize and be a bit clever about what you do and get synergies and things. So that was one reason. I thought the game really rewarded rushing and catching your opponents off guard. Number 2 was because my brother, who I played most of my games with, wasn't too big of a fan of it. So again, I'm not going to force somebody to play a game they don't really enjoy too much. So those 2 reasons made it leave my collection, but a game I'd happily go back and play, but wouldn't really seek out again. I feel like I've played it quite a few times now and got what the game had to offer. Next up, probably the one that pulled my heartstrings the most to get rid of, at least on this list. This one is Adventureland. Now, this is a game by one of my favourite designers, Wolfgang Kramer. I think Michael Keesing might have been involved in this one, but don't quote me on that. This one is a family weight game where you have this huge grid of these different terrains, and you are moving these meeples down, trying to collect different swords and herbs and things and gold to get points, and slaying these different monsters. But it had a real cool idea where you have these 3 different scenarios based on the kind of level of complexity you want. Some would be like an area control game where you're trying to control these different castles by having the most people in them. But I love the idea that you would draw these cards off and items would pop up all over the grid. But you had to be the first to go there, but you can never go back on yourself and up the grid. So you've got to be worried about when you're going to commit and how far you're going to travel down that board. And I really can't say anything bad about this game. The only thing for me was that The game only came with 3 scenarios, and I think once you played them, I felt like I had no reason to play them again. And on top of that, I think the expansion is very hard to get hold of, and I couldn't get hold of a copy. But yeah, a game that's very well rounded, extremely inviting, and probably one of my most recommended family games. You know, this still holds my seal of quality. I do recommend it. But for me personally, I felt like, a bit like some of these other games, I felt like I'd explored what it has to offer. I'm satisfied with the amount of times I played it. Nothing bad to say about it, but ultimately I wouldn't have gone back to it, at least not with any degree of excitement. Next up, I have definitely the heaviest game on the list. This one is Alchemists. Now, Alchemists is one of the first games that implemented app use. It's a worker placement and deduction game where you are trying to work out these different... I don't know how to explain it. You're trying to work out what all these different ingredients kind of chemical sign is. And you're trying to use that to publish these theories, and if you're right, to be the first to publish theories, you're going to get points, and people can debunk your ideas and things. I love the concept and the idea of this game. It's really cool, but and there's a lot to go into, and I can't really explain that in just a minute or so. But for me, the level of complexity and fiddliness with this game stopped it from getting to the table, and also kind of probably a more 2 hour to 2.5 hour length in game as well. Which again stopped it from getting to the table as regularly as we would have liked it to. I can't really say much bad about it. The worker placement element of the game didn't kind of rock my world. I thought it was quite standard and wasn't terribly exciting. You know, just getting your resources and things. But that deduction part of the game was really well done, extremely interesting, and very brain burnery. But ultimately, it wasn't a game we were in the mood to play very often, and a bit like 13 Clues, in terms of being a deduction game, it got replaced by Awkward Guests again. It just completely kicked it out of our collection, and we know that as soon as we got Awkward Guests, we were never going to go back and play Alchemists. So, a shame, a really good design, and certainly requires some praise about how well this is put together. But just those few little speed bumps and hurdles to go over just stopped it getting played. Next up, I have a game from 2020, actually. This one is Alma Mater. Now, Alma Mater was actually one of my most anticipated games of last year because it's by some of my favourite designers. And it's kind of touted as a spiritual successor to Coimbra, which is one of my favourite games. This one is a really great theme about being these headmasters in these different universities. It's a worker placement game where you are trying to use these books really, and these books have kind of a changing value throughout the game, and you are collecting these abilities and so on. For me, I was hugely disappointed with this one. I couldn't even explain how let down I felt with this. I didn't enjoy it at all. I felt all the abilities you can get were really boring and stagnant. I thought the game had a real boring, slow and churning way of collecting resources. It just didn't feel like you were achieving much at all with this one. Looked gorgeous, but the gameplay, despite my trying to look at this through rose-tinted glasses, it just didn't shine for me. It was dull, boring, and just no fun. And for me, that's just inexcusable. No good at all. And the first game they've ever made that I didn't enjoy. Next up, and finally in this episode, the game I'm going to be talking about is Architects of the West Kingdom. So Architects of the West Kingdom is immensely popular worker placement game. A game that has a real nice flow to it because there's no turns or anything in this game. You're collecting resources, buying buildings. You can choose to arrest other players. It has a real nice building and kind of compounding way of collecting resources where if you place workers on a certain spot, the first one you place, you get 1 resource, then you get 2 resources and 3 resources per placement, which is really good. So it had a real nice flow and kind of trajectory in the game, which I really liked. I can't fault it at all. For me, though, I'm a bit funny when it comes to worker placement games. I need them to be something really special for me to enjoy them. I like your Sulkins, for example, where you've got the gears, or your barrages where you've got the main board that's really interactive. Worker placement for me, it shouldn't be the main focus on a game. I like the other stuff that goes around it and use the worker placement as a framework. But for me, this one was a bit too similar to those mediocre worker placement games that are used to get people into the hobby. You know, games like your Stone Ages, your Lords of Waterdeeps. It was a bit like that with a few extra layers in terms of arresting the other players, in terms of collecting the resources. There's some tracks as well that were quite interesting. Ultimately, a really nice game that was very well designed, and I can't fault it. But my personal tastes didn't differentiate this from a lot of the other games on the market, and after a few plays, it didn't excite me anymore. And that's the reason why I got rid of it. Glad I played it, enjoyed my plays of it, but no reason to go back and revisit it. So I hope you enjoyed this first episode of my games I got rid of and why. If you have enjoyed it, please give me some feedback and let me know where I can improve things and so on. If you have, please enjoyed the video, that is. Please hit like and subscribe to my channel and check out my other videos too. For everyone else, I'll see you next time on Chairman of the Board. Bye.